What kind of mother gives her daughter away to a stranger, and what kind of stranger changes her life forever? Sarah had asked herself that question 100 times since the wagon left her mother's cabin. Yet on this cold morning in the Colorado mountains, she still could not believe her life had been traded for medicine, school fees, and a sliver of hope. The mountains around her stood tall and silent, as if waiting to judge whether she would break or survive. She pulled her thin shawl closer around her shoulders as the wagon creaked beneath her. Her hands trembled from cold and fear. 1 week ago, she had still been sewing shirts for pennies, nursing her dying mother, and trying to keep her little brother from starving. Now she was on her way to marry a man she had never seen, a man people whispered about in town, a mountain man broken by a grizzly and trapped in bitterness. Caleb Brennan. The name alone filled her with dread. They said he could barely walk. They said he lived like a ghost in his own house, shut away from the world. They said his temper had grown sharp as the cliffs around the ranch. Sarah wiped her palms on her skirt. She had no choice. Her mother's life depended on this. Tom's future depended on this, and she had promised herself she would do anything to protect them. As the wagon climbed higher into the valley, the air turned colder. Jacob, the old ranch hand driving her, kept his eyes forward. Martha Brennan had promised Sarah the house was warm, safe, and well kept. But safety meant very little when her heart felt like it was about to crack. At last, they reached the ranch. Sarah's breath caught at the sight. This was no small homestead. The main house was made of thick logs with a wide porch and a tall chimney sending smoke into the sky. A barn stood behind it, sturdy and full of life. Horses moved in the corral. Men worked nearby. Everything looked strong and permanent, like it belonged to the mountains. Sarah did not feel like she belonged anywhere anymore. Jacob helped her climb down, and Martha stepped out onto the porch, smiling warmly. "Welcome, Sarah," she said. "Come inside. You must be tired." Sarah followed her heart pounding. The home was warm and bright, with a large stone fireplace and shelves full of books and maps. Trophies from hunts hung on the walls. She could almost feel the presence of the man who had once climbed peaks and roamed the wilderness. Then she heard it, the slow, uneven thump of footsteps. A cane tapping on wood. Her stomach tightened. Sarah turned. A tall man stood in the doorway. His shoulders were broad, his face rough and weathered. His dark hair brushed his collar, but it was his eyes that caught her, cold, gray, sharp, and full of a pain she couldn't yet understand. He leaned heavily on a carved cane, his left leg stiff and weak. This was Caleb Brennan. He studied her without emotion. "You must be Sarah," he said. His voice was low and rough. "Martha said you'd arrive today." She swallowed. "Yes, sir, and you must be Caleb." He nodded once. "So we're to be married tomorrow." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's what your aunt said." Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you agree to this?" Quote, the question hit like a blade. Did she? Could she? What did agreement even mean when survival was the price? She lifted her chin. "Did you?" Caleb paused, then shook his head. "No, but I am a man with few choices, a cripple with no chance of finding a wife any other way. What's your excuse?" Anger flared in her chest. "My excuse is that my mother is dying, my brother is hungry, and this was the only way to save them." Caleb stared at her for a long moment. His expression changed. Not much, but enough for her to see something softer behind the bitterness. "At least you're honest," he said. "More than most." He turned away, limping toward the hall. The sound of his cane echoed behind him. Sarah let out a shaky breath. She had just met the man she would marry tomorrow, and nothing about him felt safe or familiar. She wasn't sure if she feared his pain or his silence more. That night, sleep refused to come. She lay in her new room, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked softly with the wind. Somewhere down the hall, Caleb moved about, slow and steady, his cane tapping against the floor. She pictured his grim expression, the stiffness of his steps, the weight he carried in his eyes. Tomorrow she would become his wife, not by choice, not by love, but by sacrifice. When morning came, Sarah dressed in the simple cream-colored dress Martha had left for her. She tied her hair back with trembling fingers. Downstairs, Martha waited with a preacher. Caleb stood near the fireplace, dressed plainly, leaning on his cane. He looked at her, but didn't smile. His face was unreadable. The ceremony was short, quiet. No music, no flowers, no joy. When the preacher said the final words, Caleb didn't kiss her. He simply nodded, his jaw tight, and stepped back toward the shadows of his study. Sarah stood alone in the middle of her new life, a ring on her finger, and a stranger for a husband. The wind outside howled against the cabin walls. Nothing about this beginning felt like hope, but the mountains had a way of shaping people. And though Sarah didn't know it yet, this cold man, this broken mountain man, was about to change everything she believed about love, pain, and destiny. Because sometimes the people we are forced to face become the ones who save us in ways we never expect. Sarah never imagined that sharing a house with her new husband would feel like sharing space with a silent storm. Caleb spoke only when needed. He kept to himself. He ate alone. He moved through the house like a shadow, present but distant, heavy with bitterness that seemed older than his scars. But Sarah refused to give up. On her third morning at the ranch, she carried breakfast to the dining room and sat alone at the long wooden table. Minutes later, she heard the slow tap of Caleb's cane. He stopped at the doorway, surprised to find her waiting. "I thought you take your meals alone," he said. "I thought we were trying to live like people who share a home," Sarah replied, meeting his eyes. He hesitated, then came inside. Every step looked like it cost him something. He lowered himself into the chair across from her with a stiff grunt. They ate in silence at first, the clink of forks echoing through the room. Finally, Sarah said, "This house is too quiet." Caleb didn't look up. "Quiet has been my companion for a long time. It doesn't have to stay that way." He didn't answer, but he stayed at the table until she finished, and that small act felt like the first shift in a long, steep climb. Over the next days, Sarah explored the ranch. She walked the pastures, the barn, the gardens. She met the workers who eyed her with curiosity. When they thought she couldn't hear, she caught whispers. Poor girl. Forced into this, married to a crippled man with a ruined temper, she kept her chin high. She had survived worse. One afternoon, Sarah found herself in the library, running her fingers across the spines of books when she heard the uneven rhythm of footsteps behind her. She turned. Caleb stood in the doorway. His eyes flicked from her to the open journal on the desk. "Those were from before," he said. His voice wasn't sharp, just tired. "I used to guide hunting parties, survey mountains, map trails no one else would risk." Sarah saw something change in his face, an old ache rising to the surface. "You loved it," she said. "With everything I had," he answered quietly, "until the grizzly took what I was." "Your body changed," Sarah said gently, "but the man who lived in these pages is still here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. This cane is not who I was. This house is not my life. I'm trapped in something I never chose." Sarah's breath caught. The words felt too familiar. "We're both trapped," she whispered. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. That night, as he turned to leave the room, she said, "Caleb?" He paused. "We don't have to be strangers." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away as quickly as usual. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen helping Hannah prepare bread. He watched her for a long moment, then said, "We can share supper tonight." Sarah looked up, stunned. "I'd like that." And so the dinners began. The first night was quiet. The second night brought a few words. By the end of the week, Caleb asked about her mother's letters, about Tom, about her childhood. He never smiled, but his voice softened when he spoke to her. His eyes held less bitterness each time she caught him watching her. One evening, after supper, Sarah stepped out onto the porch. The mountains glowed orange from the setting sun. The air smelled of pine and snow. Behind her, she heard the door open. Caleb joined her, leaning on his cane. "You shouldn't stand too long," he said. "Cold air here bites hard." "I don't mind," Sarah replied. "This place feels peaceful." "Peaceful," Caleb repeated quietly. "I remember that word." Sarah looked at him. "Tell me." He hesitated, then began to speak of the mountains, the ridges he climbed at dawn, the trails only he could navigate, the nights he slept under the stars with nothing but the wind for company. As he talked, something lit inside him. His voice grew steady, rich, alive. Sarah listened, mesmerized. This was the man he had been before pain stole his spirit. "Did you ever feel afraid out there?" she asked. "Never of the wild," he said. "Only of losing it." He stared at the mountains long enough that Sarah wondered if he was somewhere far away in his mind. Then his voice broke slightly. "I miss it every day." "You could go again," Sarah said softly, "not to climb peaks, but to ride, to see the places you love." "I can't," he said. "Not like before." "Maybe not like before," she said, "but maybe you don't have to be the man you were. Maybe you can be the man you are." He looked at her with something she had never seen in his eyes, hope mixed with fear. "Why do you care?" he asked. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything and still try," Sarah whispered. A long silence stretched between them, warm and full. From that night, things changed. Caleb began meeting her at breakfast. He began walking with her around the property, pointing out old trails and hidden springs. When she asked him to sit with her by the fire, he agreed. Their conversations grew longer, their silences more comfortable. One crisp afternoon, she found him on the porch, staring at the mountains. His hand trembled slightly on the cane. "Sarah?" he said, his voice low. "Yes?" "Would you ride with me to the tree line?" Her heart leapt. Of course. The ride was slow. Caleb's movements were careful and tense. But as the forest opened into a snowy meadow, something inside him changed. His eyes softened. His shoulders loosened. He breathed deeply, like a man returning home after years of exile. "This," he whispered, "this I remember." They sat there together, surrounded by white silence and towering pines. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly, "for not letting me stay buried." Sarah looked at him, her breath caught. "You're welcome." It was the first time he smiled, small, hesitant, but real, and it warmed her more than the sun on her face. Sarah didn't know when her fear turned into understanding, or when understanding turned into something deeper. But she did know one thing. The man she had been given away to was not the broken stranger she met at the door. He was more. He was becoming someone she could trust, someone she could care for, someone she might even, one day, love. The mountains were still dressed in winter when Sarah realized something inside her had changed. She no longer walked the ranch with fear in her chest. She no longer avoided Caleb's eyes. She no longer felt trapped in a stranger's life. Somehow, without either of them planning it, they had begun to fit together like two pieces of wood, carved by the same storm. But even as warmth grew between them, shadows still lingered in Caleb's heart. One night, snow drifted softly outside as they sat by the fire. Caleb rubbed his injured leg with a grimace he tried to hide. "Is it hurting more?" Sarah asked. "It always hurts," he admitted. "Some days I forget. Some days I can't think about anything else." She hesitated, then touched his hand gently. "You're stronger than you think." A long silence followed. His jaw tightened. "Sarah, do you regret this life?" he asked quietly. She blinked. "Why would you think that?" "Because you didn't choose it," he said. "You didn't choose me." Quote. Her heart ached at the sadness in his voice. "I didn't choose the beginning," Sarah said, "but I can choose what comes next." Caleb stared into the fire, his fingers trembling slightly. Then he whispered, "I want you to stay, not because you're bound to me, not because of the contract, but because you want to, but I don't know if I deserve that." Her breath caught. She placed her hand over his. "You deserve more than you believe." Slowly, carefully, he turned his hand and held hers. That night changed everything. From then on, the distance between them slowly faded. Their suppers turned into long talks. Their walks turned into shared laughter. Their rides into the mountains became moments of quiet closeness. Each day, Caleb let her see more of him. Not the broken man, not the bitter recluse, but the man beneath all the hurt, The man who loved the sunrise. The man who once lived wild and free. The man who fought every day to become whole again. Spring thawed the land, and something thawed between them as well. One mild evening, Sarah stood on the porch watching the valley glow gold at sunset. Caleb stepped beside her, leaning on his cane. He looked tired from the day's work, but there was a softness in his eyes she had come to know well. "You make this house feel alive again," he said quietly. Sarah smiled. "I'm glad." He swallowed, struggling with the words. "I never thought I'd say this, not after everything, but you've given me back something I thought I lost forever." "What's that?" she asked. "Hope," he said. "And more than that, you've given me a reason to live beyond my past." A warm wind brushed her hair as his voice grew steadier. "Sarah, I want a real marriage. A life with you. Not out of duty. Not out of the deal our families made, but out of choice. My choice." Her heart pounded. "Caleb." He stepped closer, the distance between them closing slowly, like a gate that had been locked for too long. "I love you," he whispered. The words shook her. For a moment, all she could hear was her heartbeat and the soft wind in the pines. She thought of the frightened girl who arrived here months ago. The girl who had felt betrayed and empty. The girl who never imagined she could feel safe again. And now, this man stood before her, offering a future she never expected. Tears filled her eyes. "I love you too," she said softly. "I didn't plan it. I didn't want to feel it. But I do." Caleb's breath caught in his chest. He reached up and brushed a tear from her cheek with gentle fingers. Then he kissed her, slow, tender, full of everything they had been too afraid to say until now. That night, they finally shared the same bed, not as strangers bound by a deal, but as a man and woman choosing each other. And the mountains, timeless and still, seemed to bless the new beginning. Months later, as summer warmed the valley, Sarah learned she was carrying a child. When she told Caleb, he dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around her, laughing and crying at the same time. "Me?" he whispered. "A father?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice shaking with joy. "You!" He held her tightly. "This is the life I thought I'd lost forever." Their son was born during the first snowfall of winter, a strong baby boy with dark hair and clear gray eyes. Caleb held him gently, tears running down his face. "Benjamin," he whispered, "welcome home, son." Sarah had never seen her husband look so full of life. Years passed. Their home grew warm and full. They had a daughter named Anna, with Sarah's dark eyes and Caleb's stubborn spirit. Tom became a young man with dreams bigger than the mountains. Sarah's mother lived long enough to see the grandchildren she thought she'd never meet. And Caleb? He became known across the mountain passes, not as the broken man he once was, but as the man who rebuilt his life from ashes, with love as his anchor and Sarah as his strength. One crisp autumn afternoon, after many years of marriage, Caleb and Sarah rode up to their favorite ridge. The valley stretched before them, peaceful and golden. Caleb looked at her, older now but still holding the fire she brought into his life. "You saved me," he said softly. Sarah shook her head. "No, we saved each other." They sat together, watching the mountains that had shaped their lives and their love, and as the sun dipped behind the peaks, Caleb took her hand. "Everything we built," he said, "came from the hardest beginning." Sarah smiled, leaning against him. "Sometimes," she whispered, "being given away is the only way fate can lead you home." The wind carried their laughter across the valley as they turned their horses toward the ranch, toward the life they created from sacrifice, courage, and a love that no one, not even a grizzly, could destroy.